If the thundercloud.
Every single day that you're a black man, especially in the South, every day was a day of humiliation. The whole system of segregation or slash apartheid was designed to maintain the inferior status of black people. It was as close to slavery as they could possibly keep us.
So let it be.
All right, hello everyone. I just want to say thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you to you gentlemen as well. We're very happy to have you here. We are going to start off the night with a little video we have of Mr. Person and Mr. Lackey meeting earlier this week. So James, if you'd get that started for us.
Yeah, it's perfect. I wish I had this at home.
Yes, sir. Good to see you, sir.
I don't move as well as I used to, but I still have a lot of enthusiasm.
Right.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you, sir. Yeah, you got it all there,
They
haven't
gave
you?
me this little Cadillac. Oh, I see you have one as well.
Yeah, that's a World War II deal. You was in Vietnam, I understand.
I was Vietnam vet.
That was a tough duty.
Yeah, it was one, and
You know, I'm thinking when I got my deal here, I should have got the big wheels.
it's a really convenient no matter where I go. It's sometimes a little awkward getting in the car. But
Yeah.
Other than that,
I should have got the big wheels. I guess. Didn't even think about it when I got it.
good evening again. Most of you have heard about my stories. I'm just happy this evening that I have some of my friends here. And once you get to know them, you'll love them like I do, because they're wonderful people. And we go back.
Who are you talking about?
Those other guys
Oh,
and like else.
okay.
But it's been a good ride. Starting the movement in the 60s was the thing to do on campus. Berkeley had its free speech movement, and we had our chance to make a difference, to make America better, and to make life better for black people in general. As a student, I was excited that I had an opportunity to get involved. We started off with a boycott, with marches, sit-ins, wait-ins, church-ins. We did it all. And after about 8 months, we were able to reap the benefits of our efforts. They desegregated the lunch counters. They started hiring blacks for jobs other than janitors and maids. and life was beginning to be good because it gave us, as young kids, something to look forward to. Before that, it was very difficult for a black man without an education to earn more than $40 or $50 a week. And it's very difficult to raise a family on those kinds of dollars. You were limited as to where you could go, how high you could reach. But this opened up all kinds of doors for us and gave us all kinds of possibilities. And I was happy to be a part of that. Because then I didn't have to just work on things that I didn't want to do. For example, in Atlanta, one of the best jobs you could get was the post office. But it doesn't take a degree to work at the post office. Black policemen could only arrest black criminals. There were so many limitations that were placed on us, and some of it's laughable now, and some of it is really silly, but that's how life in the South was. So for me, it was a start. It gave me an opportunity to work towards making our country a better place to live.
I demonstrated in Nashville, Tennessee, along with Congressman John Lewis, who was in Nashville at the same time, C.T. Vivian, and a lot of the civil rights leaders today, students in Nashville, Tennessee. James Belvin, you probably read about him. We had demonstrated many months in Nashville. But when we heard about the Freedom Ride, it had been stopped in Anniston, Alabama, and the bus was burned, and they said the ride was over. I was one of the 12 students who left Nashville, Tennessee, to take up the ride. We left Nashville, went to Birmingham. On the way to Birmingham, the city limits, the policeman stopped the bus. And famous Boo O'Connor, I'm sure you read about him already, got on the bus and gave us his speech about blacks and whites should not sit together on the bus. And that was a law in Alabama. The two students on the front seat of the bus, and I'm sure you've seen the picture of Jim Swergs, who was beaten so bad in Montgomery, it went off again, okay, was taken off the bus and was taken to jail. Eventually, they let the bus go into Birmingham. And when we got to Birmingham, they put newspaper over the windows of the bus because the news reporters was there, and they was trying to take pictures of what was going on. They agreed that if we go into the colored side of the bus station, they would let us off. And we agreed. And we went immediately into the white side of the bus station, where we spent most of that night. Bill Connor came in and said that for our protection, he put us in jail. So we stayed in jail the first night and the second night. And he took us out early one morning, around 12:30, 1 o'clock, in two limousines, and took us to the Alabama and Tennessee line and put us out early one morning about 6 o'clock. We didn't know if the Ku Klux Klan was following us, what was going to happen. My other dear friend who was in the car with us said that we stopped on the way and picked up a priest. And I was in the second car. I didn't know about the priest because I probably would have died of a heart attack knowing they picked up a priest. But anyway, they put us out on the railroad track. We had to find a way to find a family that was black so we could make a telephone call and get a ride back to Nashville, Tennessee. We went down the railroad track and stopped at a house that we thought was black. We knocked on the door. The man came to the door. We told him we was Freedom Riders. And he shook his head and said, "No, you can't come in." Catherine always tells us stories, say, if you want to get something done, knock hard and get the wife or get the lady of the house. So we knocked again. She came to the door. She said, "Y'all children, come on in." She fed us. We made a telephone call to Nashville, Tennessee. In the meantime, we had made a decision that we were going back to Birmingham. And that afternoon, that night, we was back in Birmingham again. but we spent several days before we went into Montgomery, and I'll start again after that.
Every single day that you're a black man, especially in the South, every day was a day of humiliation. The whole system of segregation or slash apartheid was designed to maintain the inferior status of black people. It was as close to slavery as they could possibly keep us. So after the Civil War with the Emancipation Proclamation, the attitudes toward black people as human beings had not changed. So we needed a system to maintain us as close to slavery as possible. So you brought in and instituted this system of segregation. Every single day of your life, you are being humiliated. So I don't necessarily think of this as a civil rights movement. That kind of sanitizes it. It was a human rights movement. So every single day of my life, there was something to remind me that I was not a first-class human being. So what did it take to get me to rebel to that? No more than it took anybody else through history to rebel when they were being treated unfairly and when they did not have their freedom. So I didn't need much to convince me, but the spark of those 4 students sitting down at the lunch counter in Greensboro was equivalent to that shot being heard around the country when we all decided we've had enough, it is time to stand up and fight. Mine didn't.
I didn't tell mine the whole truth. I told them that I was going for training and I was going to be taking a bus ride. The other stuff they never knew until we got to Atlanta.
Mine was a little different. I told you, my hometown, or my home, it was 3 red lights, 2 red lights, and 6 stop signs. My mother found out I was on the Freedom Ride when she saw it on television, and that was amazing for her. One of the things about living in a small town is that everybody knows everybody. All the whites knew each other, blacks knew the whites, and whites knew the black. My father worked at a small factory, and he was called in several times and threatened to be fired because I was on the Freedom Ride. And I asked him, "Do you know what that boy doing? You know about your son?" The only answer he could say was that, I sent him to college, and he's grown now, and he's on his own. My mother was fired twice of her job. I'm the oldest out of 8 children, and my sister and brothers was in high school and elementary school. They was in several fights. It got tough for my family. One of the things in Parchman, Mississippi, was that you could write letters home, but you could not seal them up. They had to go through the front office so they can read them and see what you were sending out. So we had our own codes, and as soon as Hank finished his book, you realize the different codes we had to not only to stay alive, but also to get information out to the families. My mother asked me when I was going to get out of jail, and I told her that 2 weeks before my oldest sister's birthday. 2 weeks before my oldest sister's birthday is June the 16th, but the jailers didn't know that. So different codes that even when we sent buses in from Nashville, Tennessee, they would say 20 packages are coming, whatever code they use in Nashville, Tennessee. But my mother told me, sent me a letter and said, "Son, it's the best for you not to come home." I did not go back to my hometown, but once in 4 years after being on the Freedom Ride, I went in one night, my grandfather died, and went to the funeral the next day. The next night, I was back on the bus, back to Nashville, Tennessee. The Ku Klux Klan sit down the road from my mother's house. They had gone, people always say my mother and father's house. They had gone around the community trying to find out, where I was located, when I was coming home. where I was, that I still drive the school bus or whatever, because they planned to really do something to me. And I think that's the only time my mother was really afraid. One of the things we never talk about, and there's Hank and Charles and all that, was several things we didn't do. Number one, we didn't have psychological care when we got out of prison. We talked to each other every once in a while. I guess we've gotten together more in the last 5 years than we did in the last 50 years from being on the Freedom Ride. We went our separate ways. A lot of folks, a lot of the students went for voter registration, done the Selma March, I done the Selma. I went on and taught school a couple of years, but we didn't get a chance to relieve the pressure we had on the inside. Charles talked about that sometime now, and we did it in Nashville, Tennessee about 5 years ago. What really happened to us, and the questions you all give us now, why'd you do it? But one of the things we never think about is the pressure that you put your family under. My mother was very frightened, very afraid, not only just for herself, but for me, because she thought I'd be killed and wouldn't make it back home. So that's one of the things that we've been focused on lately, is that what happened to your family when you went on the Freedom Ride? Not only for just your sisters and brothers, but your mother and father, and how it affected them at home. One of the things that compelled me was because of the fact that the bus was burned in Anniston. But before that time, you're probably too young to understand that segregation was a way of life. And even during my time, my high school, I drove the school bus and passed by the white high school with my students onto the black high school. Didn't think anything about that too much. Back in 1960 and 61, 58, 1960 and 61, was the fact that it happened sometime before that. And my father worked at a factory. My mother worked in kitchens, ironed clothes for whites, cooked for whites. And it was a decision that no one would challenge that system. But when I left and went to Nashville, Tennessee, I saw that things was different from my little hometown. My little hometown had 2 red lights and 6 stop signs. It made a difference when I went to Nashville, Tennessee. I guess the population at that time in my hometown was a little over 6,000. Nashville, Tennessee, the University of Nashville, Tennessee had students at 8,000 or 9,000. So it was a lot different environment for me. But when I realized that things could be different, I made a decision as a freshman at Tennessee State that I was going to make a difference in the community and the environment where I live.
For me, I took the words of John Kennedy when he was sworn in, that this was a new day and they were passing of the torch. So I said, well, hey, I'll go to Georgia Tech. I got good SAT scores. My GPA was 3.82. Hey, so I applied to Georgia Tech. And of course, they refused my application, even though I had been accepted at MIT. And I think at that time, MIT was one of the best engineering schools in the country. So we have a school here in town called Emory. I applied to Emory. I sent in my application on a Monday. I got my rejection back on a Wednesday. And we didn't have express mail in those days. But they were determined to let me know that they didn't want me. So here you are, you've done the things your parents have asked you to do, you tried to be a good student, and I was well-rounded. I was a jock as well as an academic. And here you are, you can't go to the school that you want to go to. So I elected to go to Morehouse. And probably it was a life-changing event because Dr. Mays was the president of the college, a wonderful man, brilliant man, and just a lot of good people who wanted to work together. And after we had our first meeting about the boycott, about the sit-ins, it was all over. I changed my major. I was initially a humanities major, and we had a field trip to Oak Ridge National Laboratories And I saw my first reactor, and it was love at first sight. And I was determined that this is my field. I'm going to be a nuclear engineer or a nuclear physicist. And I had a lot of ambition, and I thought the country was ready for us. But it didn't matter. No matter what this country needed, they're talking now, you need people who are good in math, technology, and engineering. And here's an opportunity. There were a lot of kids in my group that I grew up with, men and women, who had extremely good scores in math and science. Yet because we were black, they weren't ready for us. But that was really the driving force behind a lot of the decisions I made there, because I was angry as a young man that I couldn't go to the school I wanted to, even though I know I was eminently qualified to do so.
Thank you. All right, well, we are going to move on, and we are going to take a look at Mr. Lackey, who could not be here with us tonight. We're going to take a look at his involvement in the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I know you've seen that picture of me fingerprinting those squads. Well, I was a lieutenant in charge of records and identification at that time, and there's a lot of different ways to fingerprint people, and I didn't want anything to go wrong. You know, you can do it easy, or you can sometimes break fingers and stuff like that, you know. So that was the reason that I decided that I would handle it.
They made a decision with the governor of Alabama that they were going to protect us into Montgomery, and then the bus from Montgomery going to Jackson, Mississippi. Remember that Freedom Ride was on the way to New Orleans. We got back the next morning, the bus was ready to go, we loaded. We had also additional students from Nashville, Tennessee, students from other colleges and universities. But before the bus got ready to leave and go into Montgomery, all the bus drivers decided that they were not going to drive. And you got to keep in mind that back during that time was no black bus drivers, not even for street buses, and not even for buses that ran across the state lines. And one bus driver said that he had one life to live. He was not going to give it to SNCC, NAACP, and nobody else. And he turned his resignation in at that time. In the meantime, the Kennedy administration finally got a decision with the governor of Alabama that he would protect us when we got into Montgomery. We loaded the bus in Montgomery, and when we left the bus station, we had 6 police motorcycles in front of the bus. We had a helicopter flying on top of the bus. We had state troopers every 3 miles down the highway on each side. When we passed in the bus, we had 10 state trooper cars behind the bus. We got into Montgomery, Alabama, the city limits. All protection that we had when we left Birmingham depleted. We didn't see anybody, no policemen, nowhere. Congressman John Lewis said, "Bill, it looked bad." We put into the bus station in less than 15 minutes. You had over 1,000 Ku Klux Klansmen. And the worst part about it, you had young kids. You had women that had their children with them, babies, 5 years old, 3 years old, all of them hollering profane language, kill them niggas, which was real bad. We got beat up bad. Jim Swerg, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of Jim Swerg, who was beat so bad. We eventually got a chance to escape the Ku Klux Klan. The policeman, as you know, came in 30 minutes later. And we went into an old U.S. government post office. That's how we were protected. The next morning, Dr. King came down, and we were going to have a mass meeting. After the beating in Montgomery, you can't believe we had over 1,000 people in the church for the mass meeting. And that's when they began to turn over the cars. We thought they were going to burn the bus down. That's when Dr. King called the President Kennedy, and said, "Blood, we're going to run down the street." And that's when he sent in the National Guard. I'll start later.
I hate to again, I'll segue.
I was on the bus that was set afire in Anniston, and the reason they set the bus afire is because they could not get aboard the bus. We had locked the doors of the bus from the inside. They broke out all of the windows, and still they could not get aboard the bus to get at us. So then they had an incendiary device that they think came from the Army base there at Fort McClellan, and they set the bus afire with that incendiary device. And as the bus burned, probably just took a matter of seconds, and we tried to get off the bus, and they saw that. So they held the door shut, said, let's burn them niggas alive. And it was only by the fact that the fire reached the fuel tank of the bus in the back, and it blew out, that he thought the entire bus was going to blow up, and that they ran, and that was the only way we could get out. But after that bus was set afire and we were finally able to get off of the bus, the ambulance came and they would not take the Black Freedom Riders to the hospital. And the reason being that there's a law on the book at that time that in the state of Alabama, a white ambulance cannot take a black person to the hospital. And the same holds true for a black-owned ambulance company could not take a white person, kind of like the 1930s in Germany, where Jews were not allowed on the public transit. That mob followed us to the hospital. The hospital would not treat us because we were in the white emergency room. And so the white Freedom Riders said, you don't treat them, and the treatment included giving us oxygen because we all had smoke inhalation. If you don't treat the blacks, then we're not going to be treated also. So they finally relented, and by this time the mob is outside the hospital. The hospital authorities locked the doors. They then said, if you don't send them out, we're going to set this hospital afire. I want you to let your mind wander back to 1961 in America. Some people were going to set the hospital afire, killing I don't know how many other people there just to get at the Freedom Riders. And Bill talked about the people there with their kids. When they attacked that bus and just before they burned it, these people, we are told, had just come from church, and they had their children with them. And they put their children, the men, on their shoulders so they can see the Freedom Riders being beaten up. Oftentimes we have sanitized our history. I want you to think about this. That's the kind of country, that portion of the country we lived in, where people were willing to murder some folks simply because we sat on the front seat of a bus. In Germany, they did that to the Jews. And this was America, and that's the kind of country, or the South, or that region, that's the kind of region with that attitude that I grew up in. And it wasn't until someone called Washington, D.C. again, the president, the Justice Department was able to get in touch with Governor Patterson that he wasn't going to provide protection. He had said that. And they did get in touch with Fred Shuttlesworth, and the only thing Governor Patterson would promise is that made sure that when Shuttlesworth was driving up from Birmingham, that no one would interfere with him. And that's how we escaped Anniston, Alabama. That was America in 1961.
Now you can imagine there were no cell phones in those days. Now we were in a group with Hank and the others. We stopped in Anniston, Alabama. The bus driver got off, and he more or less conversed with some people around the station. Then he got back on the bus. He says, I've heard the other bus has been set afire, and they're taking the people to the hospital by the carloads. Now you can imagine our minds were really going wild because these are our friends, and we had no idea the level of danger that they had been exposed to. So the driver gets on the bus and he says, we're not going to move this bus until the niggers get in the back of the bus. Well, I always sat on the front seat on the right-hand side. So I refused to move, and so did the other students. So they began to punch us and push us, punch us and push us. And by the time they got the students about midway of the bus, two white freedom riders came to our aid, James Peck and Dr. Walter Bergman. And that really incensed them. I mean, they really were mad then. And then they began to beat Jim and Dr. Bergman, I mean, just mercifully. Dr. Bergman, they knocked to the floor of the bus, and they began stomping him in his chest with their feet. James Peck was knocked down, and he's a bleeder, and his blood made the aisle of the bus slippery as they forced us all to the back of the bus. When we got to the back of the bus, they were satisfied. And one eyewitness said that they stacked us like pancakes in the back of the bus. Once we were where they wanted us to be, the driver got back on, and this is the first time I saw a policeman. Policeman got on the bus, and these are his words: "I ain't seen nothing, don't worry about any lawsuits or anything." And he got off. But he just assured them, no matter what they had done to us, that they were not going to be prosecuted. So once they were satisfied, we headed towards Birmingham. When we got to Birmingham, we were a little weary, but we were still determined we were going to test the facilities in Birmingham. And James Peck and I were the designated testers for that day. So when we got to Birmingham, we got off and we entered the main waiting room, and the entire wall of men came towards us. They surrounded us, and James went down almost immediately. And I guess myself, being younger or whatever, I was able to maintain my balance, and as they beat us and punched us. In this melee, someone hit me in the top of the head with a pipe. And when a photographer took a picture, and that's the only picture that survived Birmingham, and that's me in that mass of humanity there. When the picture was taken, they looked up, they were startled, and they let me go. And I just walked away. I walked from the station out to the street, and as fate would have it, a city bus came along. I got on the bus, and I told the driver I'm bleeding and everything, and I says, "Take me somewhere." So he takes me about 2 blocks, and he stops, and he says, "If you go across the tracks, someone over there will help you." And if you know anything about the South in those days, black folks lived across the tracks. And the reason being is that trains burned coal in those days, and coal produces soot. And this residue is on everything. But I got across there, and they had phone booths too. So I got a phone booth. I had my little packet of emergency coins. So I called Dr. Shuttlesworth, and he sent someone to rescue me. When they got me, they said, "Well, you got to see a doctor." Well, there were 3 black doctors in Birmingham, and all 3 refused to treat me. So I never received any treatment at all for my wounds. But over the years, this particular wound had no place to go, so it drained at the base of my skull. So for many years, I carried this huge knot on the back of my head until 1996, when I was, I guess, bold enough to have it removed, because I didn't know if they had stuck me with an ice pick or a knife and the blade had broken off. And I was really leery because it would just fester at the top of my head. And for no reason, sometimes you reach up there and it would be a pus or whatever. And this went on for years and years and years. But, after a while, you realize that you have to do something. And I did have it removed, and I had a great plastic surgeon, and he took care of me.
You got a hard head, Charles. You got a hard head, John. His head is hard.
During our reunion 3 years ago, we were all taken back to the state prison farm where we were held there. And just to show you how things have changed, the warden in charge of all of the state prisons is a young black man today. So there was a sign over the entrance to the prison, "Welcome back, Freedom Riders." And the man got on the bus and said, "Mr. Thomas," and this is the warden, said, "I will be your personal guide to show you around the prison." And incidentally, once again, to see how things have progressed, I was one of several people that were put in what they call Unit 17. And Unit 17 is where the death chamber was located and still is located. And my particular cell was exactly 65 feet from the electric chair. So obviously they were not going to execute us, but that just goes to show you how serious they were about this thing called segregation. We had a meeting with some folks from the Park Service, and obviously we're trying to get their cooperation on the Freedom Riders Trail. And they were telling us about maybe how difficult it would be to get funding for it. And I simply asked them about all of the Civil War sites that have been maintained by the Park Service. And I said, since you do that as a part of history, then our fight for freedom is a part of history also. So hopefully we will get them to treat the Freedom Ride Trail the same way they treat these Civil War battlefields.
All right. We would like to share with you guys some of our interview from Thursday. Mr. Lackey was one of the police officers who was one of the first officers to arrive on the scene when the buses were being attacked in Montgomery. So this is his recollection of that day, and we'd like to share that with you.
Sure.
We would stay away from the bus station until we got a call from the state troopers that they had escorted the bus to the city limits. And when they got to the city limits, we would go to the bus station. Okay. Something apparently happened between the communications end of it. The trooper said they called their dispatcher and told them to call us, that they were at the city limits. We didn't get the call. The first call that we got was that, it was trouble at the bus station. So I was at headquarters, they told me, and I left, and I guess I was the first one there. And when I went in the bus station, there was a white guy standing by the bus, and he had bruises on his face. And I asked him, he wanted medical help, and he said no. And I had called an ambulance service, and they refused to answer the call. Ambulance wouldn't come in there. So I looked across on the back side of the bus station, and it was a car parked in the middle of the street with a door open, and a white man, laying beside. And so I went over there to see about him, and he was knocked out, and had a puffed a place behind his right ear. And I got another officer to help me pick him up. And we picked him up, and he finally come to. There's a hospital within 2 blocks of the bus station, Professional Center Hospital. So we carried him around there. I mean, he put his arm around our shoulders there. And we kept filling him in, where he was. He didn't know where he was. And got him around there, and Dr. Bartlett examined him, and he told him, he said, you got a concussion, and you need to be admitted to the hospital. And he didn't want to be admitted under his name. His name was John Siegenthaler. I don't know if you knew John or not. Yeah. Okay. Well, John had a list of all of y'all in his shirt pocket, I guess, and it kind of fell out on the street, and I had picked it up when I picked him up. And anyway, John didn't want to go in under his own name. So the doctor told him that if he went in, he'd have to go in his own name. And if he refused treatment, he'd have to sign a statement where he refused medical care. But he decided to go in, and then he asked Dr. Bartlett, could he use the phone? He wanted to make a long distance call, and he said, sure. And he called Bobby Kennedy at Hyannis Point, Maryland. And, Massachusetts. And he didn't mind us listening. He filled Bobby in on what had happened here in Montgomery, and he told us, he said, y'all have played hell,
All right. So, Mr. Person, you've heard that before, but these other two gentlemen haven't. I can tell that they're anxious to share some of their thoughts.
Let me have this phone. I was one of the students that was on the bus that left Birmingham going into Montgomery. I can't call a policeman a liar now, I'm a little bit better than that. But anyway, they had over 2 hours to get the policemen ready for us to arrive in Montgomery. Not only that, they had 2 days to get ready. They had already made a decision that they're going to protect us. The person he's talking about that was knocked out, he was from the Kennedy administration, John Siegenthaler, worked for the president of the United States. They beat him. So what you think they're going to do to us? Additionally, they refused us to go to the hospital, the regular hospital. We had to go to St. Jude, which is a hospital that would accept blacks and whites. Additionally, like Hank said and Chuck said, that white taxi cab drivers could not drive black people, or colored people at that time. And black taxi cab drivers could not drive white people. And black taxi cab drivers were afraid to drive Freedom Riders. So we were left alone. Klanman was there. The policemen intentionally let the Klanman beat us for a certain number of minutes before they moved in. It was not because they got mixed signals. Mixed signals was that, and people didn't realize it, that a lot of the policemen was Klanmen also.
Yeah.
So the mixed signals was that they wanted us to get beat up. And it was not because the other word they didn't get from somebody else. That was done intentionally and on purpose. And I was on the bus. I was one of the students that got off the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and got beat up so bad, along with Jim Sword.
Mr. Person, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like meeting with Mr. Lackey for the first time?
I found him to be a very interesting man. He had a very interesting history of patriotism and law enforcement, and I think that he was leveling with me. He wasn't trying to blow smoke. There were questions I asked him, and there are others that I had hoped to ask tonight. And I think that's the disappointment I have, is that you don't get an opportunity to interact with us. And I think that's important because you need to understand what was going on. One of the things I was concerned about, I know what black parents were teaching their kids how to survive in a segregated South. But from my point of view, I wanted to know, what did white parents tell their kids? I wanted to know how they interact. We were doing what we were supposed to do. But what were white kids being taught? How can we make this, how could we have made this better? Because we were not going to be denied. Once the movement started, we were not going to be denied. But the thing is, I think the transition would have been so much easier had we been able to talk or had dialogue. See it like Hank says, it was against the law for black and white to sit down and talk at the same table. So if you can't sit down together, how can you negotiate? How can you solve problems? Because they didn't want to solve the problems. There are a lot of interesting things that happened during the Jim Crow era. And it wasn't just black and whites. They hated Jews, they hated Mexicans, they hated dogs. And you would see signs they would post, no Mexicans, no dogs, no niggers. They were equal opportunity haters. They hated everybody, unless you were a white Protestant, because they hate Catholics too. So, it was just a rough time to live, and there's no way to live. Because, I mean, you didn't know what to do. There were so many limitations placed on you. And that's what freedom is all about. To have these restraints removed where you're free to think, free to do, free to be. And I think that's what we're all fighting for. That's that freedom. And once you get the taste of freedom, when you get the desire to be better, to do better, nobody can stop you.
All right, thank you. I guess I'm just curious, what did you take away from your conversation with Mr. Lackey on Thursday?
For me, it was an opportunity to try to heal some of the wounds because I have not totally recovered from my injuries. Now, the physical scars are gone. They're just about healed. But there are times that when we're talking like this that I just lose it. I have not been able to deal with a lot of the psychological issues. And sometimes when I talk about the things that happened to Hank and others, the thoughts of reliving those events brings back a flood of memories that my body can't handle. And also there are times I'm asked questions that I'm not prepared for, and you guys can come up with some questions from time to time that's really gets to the core. But I was hoping out of our conversation is that I would begin to find closure. And see, I have a double whammy. I've got demons from Vietnam that I'm dealing with as well. So, I've got, human rights, civil rights on one hand, and I got Vietnam on another. So that was I hope to achieve. And I think we made some measure because I felt so relieved. That night, I could not sleep. I mean, I just tossed and turned. And finally, my wife convinced me what I needed to do. And I got up and took a hot shower at about 3 a.m. in the morning. And all of a sudden, I was able to go to sleep. And I was real rested because I was so anxious for today until I get the call. And because I wanted to share that experience with you guys because it was something else. Because I would never in my wildest dream believe that it could or would happen. I mean, just really think about it. How many times can you go back in your past and get a chance to interact and find out what that person or those persons were thinking? And that was what I was hoping to do. But I do feel a whole lot better today than I did prior to Thursday. And if you ever get an opportunity to confront your demons, either, here or now, don't pass up that opportunity. And I would do it again. And if he gets better, I don't know if I'll drive back to Montgomery though, but I think if you could, if we could get together, I wouldn't miss that opportunity for anything.
Let me just comment on Mr. Lackey, is it?
Yep.
Charles, did he ever look you in the eye and said he was sorry?
He never said he was sorry. He said we made mistakes. I made mistakes. He said it many times that we made mistakes. There are things we could have done better. But the apology word, no, he never. Okay. But there was some remorse, I think. I did sense that. And I sensed a certain genuineness in our conversation. And he somewhat disarmed me because when we first met, the first thing he says to me was Semper Fi. And if you know what that means, we Marines, it's our little code. And it just kind of I think it put us both at ease and we were able to communicate. And I think based on that, he may have been a lot more open than he may have initially intended to be. Because I asked him some probing questions. Because I wanted to know, I know that, the police was supposed to have been there that Sunday to meet their bus. But we had heard, they had our itinerary. The FBI knew where we were going to be. And they said the Klan was given 15 minutes to do whatever they wanted to do. So let's face it, in any good-sized city, no policeman for 15 minutes and all hell's breaking loose. I mean, really, it was. I can't even paint a picture of what it was like those days when that mob, when you realize you're outnumbered, 3, 4, 10 to 1. And like I said, when Hayden were out on that lonely highway there, hell, they didn't have anywhere to go.
When Governor Wallace had his wheelchair to bring him into a black church in Montgomery, and before that church asked for forgiveness. He said he was sorry, and he asked for forgiveness. Now, yes, this is toward the end of his life, and he's been in pain a great deal, and I'm pretty sure there were times that he's thinking that God has been punishing him for what he did. But until someone, and including Mr. Lackey, would say, I am sorry for what I did, not give a political answer, then I'm afraid I can't take him very seriously. No one has ever said to me, and I've been back to Anniston, that I'm sorry for what I did or for what we did. So as far as I'm concerned, they really aren't. You see, in Germany today and in Eastern Europe, there are still people who hate Jews. And there are still people who, kind of think, so some Jews were killed, so what? So until someone says that I am sorry for what I did, could you forgive me? I don't think they're sincere. Anytime a black person throughout history has gone into a place where black people haven't been before, Jackie Robinson, Benjamin Davis, in terms of being the first black cadet at West Point, they have always caught hell. Always. It's something in the DNA in our society which states that for the first black person, I'm going to give you hell. So President Obama is catching the historical hell that Jackie Robinson got, that Hank Aaron got when he was nearing the breaking of Babe Ruth's record, that the Little Rock Nine got, that James Meredith got. We have overcome a great deal in this country. And I am proud to say and to be an American today. But we had to go through hell to get to where we are now.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, to my friend Bill Harbour on the panel here, let's give them a nice round of applause. Y'all have done such a wonderful job. I left home to come over here and help set up some sound and had no idea that I would come to such a program that I've witnessed here today. And as God always worked things out, even when we're not looking for them, it gave me an opportunity to thank these guys. God blessed me in such a way that I actually had an opportunity to become the first member of the Georgia National Guard of the Douglasville unit. I also was able to become the first deputy sheriff for Peach County down in South Georgia, and later on became the first black city councilman for the city of Douglasville. I simply mentioned that to say thank you guys, because without the struggle that they made, I never would have been able to do any of those things. And in reference to students, some of the things that you can do. I'm a retired educator. I taught school in Douglas County school system, and I remember as I was sitting there, when I started teaching there, the ratio was 80%, probably about 85% white and 15% black, and when I left, it was about 50-50. But one of the things I want to say to you all are going to be the leaders tomorrow. You're going to be the teachers, the educators, the judges, the lawyers, and all of the people who can make a difference in this world. Of course, you won't be able to solve all of the problems, but if you just remember that we're all in this thing together and that none of us can get out without the other one. When 9/11 came about, they didn't go through there and say, let's move the blacks over here, the whites, the Hispanics, anybody else. We were all in this thing together. And immediately after 9/11, one of the great advantages of it was that we all began to come together as a country, as America. And then after a few months, we kind of lost that. And right now, we're back in a real slump when it comes to things like racial equality. And the thing that really amazes me is that, especially to the young ladies, do you all realize that you can control this country? Women can change all of the problems of this country by yourselves. and yet you're still one of those groups that's discriminated against, that you don't make as much money as the next group, this type thing. So please, yes, give yourselves a hand for that. Please join together and make a difference. Never vote for any candidate who is not willing to push for racial equality, gender equality, whatever it is. If we're all in this thing together, let us all be equal and let's give everybody an opportunity. But thank you again, Jan. But I just wanted to say to you guys, thank you so much for paving a way, because without you and without those struggles, I would not have been able to do any of those things. And the struggle was not hard for me. I never got beat. I never went to jail. I never got any major thing happen, but it's only because you guys made that contribution. And thank you again so much.
It's been quite an evening, and again, we do thank each of you gentlemen, Hank Thomas, Bill Harbour, Charles Person. Thank you so much for being here. We also thank you again to Bill and Jay and Homer for rescuing us this afternoon so that we could have sound and video and all of these things. And I also would like to thank all of you students, because you are going to be the change that these men are looking for. You stand on their shoulders, and I know that you won't let them down. So to everyone here tonight, thank you, and go forth and do good work. We're looking forward to what you accomplish.
It happened in Florida, in the land of flowers. It was on a Christmas night. Men came stealing through the orange groves, men of hate carrying dynamite. It was on a Christmas evening, and the family prayers were said. Mother, father, daughter, and grandmother went to bed. The father's name was Harry Moore of the NAACP. He fought for the right for us to live. Black folk must be free. It seems I hear